Good morning and welcome to Peggy's Place. I'm Leanne Lindsay, your host today, and we have with us a very honored guest. She's a multi-award-winning author, Roni McFadden. She's going to be coming up in just a moment. I've got her on Zoom currently right now, and we are also on YouTube Live. So if you'd like to see us and watch the show, you can go to YouTube and just search for KGUA. That'll take you to the channel. We're also on 88.3 FM and streaming around the world at kgua.org. First, a couple of announcements. I wanted to let you know that Walala Arts is presenting Heart and Soul from Mindanao Coast artist Jane Head. And the opening is tomorrow, Saturday, April the 3rd from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. And today, on Friday, there's a member preview from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And this exhibit will continue through May 3rd. It's so nice to have some events starting up again, and all the proceeds from this exhibit will benefit our medical center, RCMS, and Walala Arts. Also coming up on April the 11th, on Sunday, it's a free Zoom event from 3 to 5 p.m. put on by the Redwood Coast Land Conservancy, and they will present a Mill Bend Community Forum. And for more information on that, go to their website, rclc.org, and look at their events calendar. Also this weekend, another event, it's going to be the Pay and Take Clothing and Book Department is going to be open from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. at the Walala Community Center right here in Walala. And that will do it real quick. Just let you know that the weather is beautiful outside. The fog was just hanging off the coast here in Northern California. It is 47 degrees with the winds are calm currently. They might get up to about 5 to 10 miles per hour today. So still pretty calm for today, but cooler than yesterday. And coming to us from Idaho is the multi-award winning author, Roni McFadden, who spent a lot of her years in Redwood Valley, Willits area in Mendocino County. Welcome to the show, Roni. Good to have you.
Thank you very much, Leanne. I'm glad to be here.
And it's so good to see you. I've known Roni for many years, as we both have a connection through Ridgewood Ranch, the home of Seabiscuit there in Willits. And Roni, why don't you actually start with that connection and your connection with Seabiscuit, and your publishing business is actually called Biscuit Press.
Correct. I worked for a large animal vet in Redwood Valley for, well, we were open for 28 years. And during that time, the horses and the livestock at the Ridgewood Ranch were under our care. And Jacqueline Cooper, who now lives at the ranch, was starting to try to bring back the line of Seabiscuit, and had some horses that were related to Seabiscuit. And we took care of them, and one of them foaled, and tragically little Josephine lost her mother at the age of 4 days, and we had to find a nurse mare. So that brought about my first book called Josephine, A Tale of Hope and Happy Endings. And by doing that book and being involved with the ranch, I had to come up with a publishing name, and it just seemed the Biscuit Press just fit the bill. And I used the ranch logo on my books, and that's how that relationship happened. And then I got to keep Romeo there for the last year that I was in California, and I got to ride those 5,000 acres that Seabiscuit once roamed.
It's a beautiful ranch. If anybody ever gets a chance, do take a look at it as you're coming down the grade from Willits. It just, the valley below opens up, and it's a gorgeous location. And I want to now transition to the book, The Longest Trail. The Longest Trail you came out with about 9 years ago. And it's a true life story of when you were a young girl in your early teens, and how you get through trauma through horses and a gentleman who is part Native American cowboy. And this, I want to tell you real quick, audience, again, this is author Roni McFadden with her book, The Longest Trail, which is going to now be it is now a screenplay, and we'll get into that in just a moment. But let's talk a little bit first about The Longest Trail. Then we can get into how the screenplay is adapted from this. It is a true story that has it. Shows her love and respect for animals and how they've changed her life. And Roni's world was turned upside down after her mother's divorce. And the only thing that she had left in her life was her horse, Sparrow. And she hermited with a cowboy and his guidance, which shaped Roni's evolution from a 14-year-old girl to a strong woman who knows exactly what she wants from life. And it's set in the 1960s and 70s in Southern California, Altadena, correct?
Altadena, yeah.
Altadena.
Yeah.
So I have been listening to this book, which became an audiobook, and it's beautifully read by yourself. And it's kept me company on the road for many miles in the last few days. As a matter of fact, we've got some clips that we're going to play from that. And in fact, let me start off with the first clip, and then we can talk about that on the other side. Okay, Roni?
Okay. Uh-huh.
All right. Here we go. And this is The Longest Trail by Roni McFadden.
Chapter 2, First Pack Trip. I was so excited to be going on a pack trip. I had never ridden horses anywhere but in my own mountains. This was going to be such an adventure. Little did I know how that first pack trip was going to impact me and be the start of the best years of my life. John had no problem talking my mom into letting me go with him. She was almost relieved that she wouldn't have to worry about me for a few days. The night we left for the pack station was electric for me. Sparrow was staying home, and I was going to be riding Big Brown. He was one of the few horses I hadn't ridden yet. He was a great big bay Morgan gelding, one of the tallest horses John had. He was very stout and heavy-muscled, as Morgans are, with a long black mane flowing every which way. I wasn't used to such a large horse after my little Sparrow, but I wasn't scared because John had an uncanny way of fitting riders with his horses. They always seemed to be the perfect match, so I knew that Big Brown and I would get along just fine. This last October trip was the last weekend of hunting season, and I knew one of the men going along. He was a neighbor who I had ridden with several times. Herb was a quiet man, an accomplished hunter, and a good horseman who loved the outdoors. I'd known him for a couple of years, and it felt good to be going with someone I knew besides John. I didn't know what to expect, being the only girl on the trip. I was very disappointed that Jim wouldn't be on that first trip. Our relationship was definitely blossoming into something special. Herb picked me up, and we drove up to the stables. There was a flurry of activity with John stuffing gear into the truck. He told me to start bringing up horses. They're all tied up, ready to go. You look nervous, Herb said. No, just uncertain of what I'm getting myself into. Excited, too. I told him as we made our way down the trail to the stable to bring the horses up to the big rig. The big rig was John's horse hauling truck. Basically, it was an old nursery van attached to a Dodge 2-ton truck. It looked like a big silver box. He had it rigged up to haul 8 to 10 horses, depending on if the bunk was in or not. The bunk was a partition up at the front of the box that would provide space to carry supplies and feed. On top of the partition, he would place a sheet of plywood and sometimes a mattress, and more stuff could be loaded up in there. Most times when the bunk was in, kids were riding on it. On hunting trips, it was filled with supplies.
So this really sets the stage for this book. And with you going on these long pack trips that you had no idea about before you had stumbled across this man, actually you've been introduced to him by someone else who wanted to help you through a very difficult time. Why don't we start there of how you ended up working with this gentleman, doing all of these pack trips, which is another connection we have in common, because I used to do pack trips in the Rocky Mountains, but I did it for pleasure. I didn't do it work-wise, but this helped you through a very difficult period.
Right. Well, it started when I had a tough time in school, and I had a tough time with my mom, and I ended up getting expelled from school for marijuana back in the 60s. It was a bad thing to do, and you got expelled, not just a slap on a wrist. So anyway, I had a friend named Doug, and he knew John Slaughter, and he took me by his stable one day and introduced us. And I fell in love with John's horses, and he asked me if I wanted to start helping around the stables and cleaning up, and I started hanging out, and that kind of started the relationship. And he had a pack station up in the high Sierras that he took hunters and families to, and that's how I ended up there. And that first pack trip was the start of a 7-year relationship between me and the high Sierras.
And those pack trips took a lot of work, a lot of effort. They are exhausting. I mean,
Yes.
to work with all the horses, describe what goes into what it takes to bring about a pack trip like that.
Well, we had the string of horses there. You have to have their food, you have to have their tack, you have to, the hunters just arrive with their stuff, and you pack them up and you load them up on the horses. But you've got the pack horse you've got to pack up, you've got to take feed up for the horses, you've got to take feed up for the people. And it's a lot of work, and most of them don't know how to ride. So you've got to babysit them. Our trail up into the high country was 18 miles. It took about 5 hours to get up there, and constant babysitting and trying to tell the hunters what to do, and in unsafe situations, trying to get them to realize they need to get off, or and most of the hunters were pretty macho guys, so here I was, a 14, 15-year-old girl, trying to tell them how to ride a horse and how to do this, and they didn't accept my advice very readily.
That reminds me of part of the book where the young man that you heard in the first clip that you've become close to, Jim,
Mm-hmm.
he is actually in the lead, and he gets off because the trail becomes unsafe.
Right.
And he's telling everybody, lead your horses across this part.
Yeah.
And one fellow does not.
Nope.
And tragedy follows.
Yep. Blaze lost his footing and went tumbling down the hill, and the hunter right behind him. And that was a pretty scary incident. He just dropped down out of sight. We couldn't see him. We could just hear this horse tumbling down the hill. And miraculously, he survived. When Jim and John ran down the hill, John took his rifle because he was sure he was going to have to shoot the horse. But
I mean, you could just imagine broken legs going head over heels down that cliff.
Yep, he was just scratched and cut, but nothing broken. It was a miracle.
I'm sure the fellow really realized what he had done.
Yeah, he had a pretty bad head laceration, so he got taken home.
Well, that is just one of those medical incidents that happens up in the high country. You've got to be ready for that, because look how far you are from any services whatsoever.
Yeah.
So you have to be prepared for everything.
Correct.
And in fact, this next clip that I'm going to play is a very interesting one, because you are out alone at night. And you are with your horse. I cannot remember which one. Maybe it's Hell's a Poppin'.
No, that was Brownie.
A Brownie, the nervous one.
Mm-hmm.
The one that likes to prance. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah.
That you were able to always manage and keep under control, but he did have a habit of prancing.
Yeah.
And so here we go. And actually, I'm just going to make it a very short spot, and then we'll be right back after this.
Okay.
I lay awake for quite some time listening to all the sounds of the night in that primitive wilderness. I wondered how many people had lain right there at that campsite looking at those same stars that felt so much closer than on the desert. I felt at peace with the universe for quite possibly the first time in my young life. The next day, I tagged along with Herb while he hunted. We went out on foot, and I had no idea what I was doing. I remember there was climbing involved. "You've got to be quiet," Herb kept telling me. "We don't want to scare away the game." Yet the sounds of me gasping for air at the top of a hill seemed to echo through the air. I lost my brand new buck knife bought for this special trip, and by the end of the day, when we came dragging back to camp, me anyway, we had not seen a single deer. I'm sure it was because they heard me making all that noise. Herb acted like it was just another stroll in the hills, while I was exhausted but fulfilled.
Well, that wasn't exactly the one clip I was thinking about, but it does give you a sense of what it was like to be up there in the high country. And but there is a segment where in the book you you are leading the horse, and the rope is over your shoulder, and something happens on the trail. Why don't you just tell us in your own words?
Okay, I had taken a group of hunters out to the desert to pack them up to go, and then I had to ride back in, and I decided to ride back in at night rather than wait till the morning because there was a full moon. It was just beautiful, and I had never ridden in at night alone before, I was on Brownie, my nervous Nellie. And we were just riding along. We got up on the top of the summit and it felt like you could touch the moon. It was just incredibly magical. And so I decided to get off and walk a little bit because it was like daylight with the full moon up there. And I had the lead rope over my shoulder and I was just walking along, leading Brownie, just listening to the saddle creak. And before I knew it, I was on my butt in the middle of the trail. And I didn't understand what had happened. But I turned around and Brownie was just frozen with his eyes just as big as saucers. And, he had pulled me by stopping. So he had flipped me over by pulling the rope. And he was just frozen and silver dollar eyes. And I turned around and there 10 feet in front of me was a mountain lion who was also frozen in the middle of the trail with saucer eyes. And I mean, I could smell him. I could feel his breath.
Whoa.
We were all just frozen. And, probably only for seconds. I have no idea. It seemed like forever. And just this whirl of dust, this little vortex came up from the side of the trail and went across in between us. And I'm watching it. And then when I looked back, the mountain lion was gone. And it was just like, what just happened? It was unbelievable. And turned around and tried to get Brownie to come back to life. And he was snorting by that time. And we just, I continued on. I got back on the saddle and we continued on probably about another hour to the cabin. And I didn't want that ride to end. It was such a spiritual encounter that I didn't want it to be over.
In fact, that's where you start to get into some of the mystical aspect of your book, The Longest Trail, and in the audio book that I was listening to, where you talk to the ancients, the grandfathers, Native American mysticism comes in. So why don't you touch a little bit on that in just a moment. First, let the listeners know that if you've just tuned in, this is author Roni McFadden and her book, The Longest Trail. It has now become a screenplay, and we're going to get into that in a moment and who the screenwriter is and the filmmaker. But first, we're going to continue talking about The Longest Trail so you get a real good sense of the book that's been out for about 9 years now. And the experiences that Roni had. I'm Leanne Lindsay, your host today on Peggy's Place. This is KGUA in Wallala, 88.3 FM. We are streaming around the globe at kgua.org, and we are live on YouTube. And as a matter of fact, for our YouTube watchers, I have a couple of pictures that are up here right now that some are from Roni's Facebook page under The Longest Trail by Roni McFadden, and that's Roni with a R-O-N-I. And then the website, thebiscuitpress.com. You can find more there. And then we have a couple of pictures of some of those horses up. But Roni, you rode a lot of horses. You had a lot of experience with different ones. Why don't we talk about first the mysticism that you talk about, and then some of the horses that you were exposed to riding.
Okay. Well, once I started spending more time there and ended up actually living at the pack station for most of the summers. And then when I was 16, I lived there alone during the winter to take care of the horses. And so as I'm exploring, I found the big stone, the big grinding stone that was right there on the desert, that was the size of a desk with holes, 12 inches deep from them grinding pinion nuts and stuff. And I think the first experience I had was when I actually reached down and touched that stone, and I just felt electricity go through me. And then I started having dreams, and I would hear voices in those dreams. I would look up at the stars and I could feel vibrations going through me. It had to be the native ancestors. That was my only explanation. I would find arrowheads. I found a spear tip. I found a little child's moccasin by the stream. Just different things that I felt were gifts to me from them. And they ended up saving me from a lot of situations up there. And I guess, for an outsider looking in would go, oh, yeah, right, everything's just coincidence. But, I believed in them. And so it's like your belief in God. I believe that the ancestors were there helping me and watching out for me. And the dreams that I had became very, very vivid and real. And so that's what I write about, the dreams in the book. A lot of people say, oh, you made that up. Well, I didn't make it up. Those were dreams I really had.
And this helped you through a very difficult time as well, because you were struggling in school and you were in sort of with the wrong crowd in a sense. Yeah. And here you had begun to peel off from that and establish a whole new way of living and a whole new world of experiences. Yeah. And it took you close to nature. It took you close to just a different way of looking at life in general.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's true.
And all the people that you came into contact with. And there was this one young girl whose name was Tonette. And I want to play this next clip because some of the hunters that you ended up having on the pack trip, they weren't really hunters, but they wanted to say that they were out on a hunting trip.
Weekend warriors.
And they'd never bring back anything. But then before we get into this clip, tell us all about a little bit about Tonette.
Tonette was a really good friend of mine. She lived up by the stables, and she was raised deer hunting with her father. She probably killed her first deer when she was 5 or 6. I mean, they went deer hunting for a month every fall. And she only went on one pack trip with me. I was really sorry about that because we rode horses all over the place in the mountains above Altadena, but she only made it to one pack trip. So this was that one pack trip, this clip that you're gonna play.
All right, here we go.
The next 2 days, Tonette and I would be sitting in front of the cabin when the hunters returned to camp. We would ask in unison, "Where's your meat?" All we got in return was dirty looks. On the 3rd day, we decided to take matters into our own hands and set out on Brownie and Poppin. We hadn't gotten more than a mile from camp when Tonette grabbed her rifle, aimed, and fired one shot, and then calmly said, "Let's go get it." Heck, I hadn't even seen it. Brownie was a bit unnerved at this point. I had fired guns from his back before with mixed results. This time, he pretty much fell apart. Luckily, Tonette was used to him and his tantrums and didn't let it bother her. She calmed him and then led us straight to the deer. I was amazed. One shot through the heart from the back of a squirrely horse. I had always heard about how good she was. Now I had seen it firsthand. We got off our horses and decided we would put the deer on Brownie to carry back to camp. As we started walking towards him, he got that look in his eye that seemed to say, "Are you serious?" What made me think that my horse that spooks at his own shadow was going to let us put a dead animal up on his back? "I don't think so," the snorting animal seemed to be saying as he sidestepped and spun away from us every time we lifted the deer towards him. He seemed to be almost near self-destruction when we realized that this was never going to happen. So we laid the deer down and sat to take a breather. We were as tired as he was. As we sat there catching our breath and watching Brownie eye the deer and us nervously, I just had to laugh. What was I thinking, trying to put that carcass on the back of the most skittish, spook-easy, scared, silly horse I had ever had the pleasure of knowing? We got back to camp and Tonette took the deer over to the main cabin. There were 2 trees in front that were spaced just perfectly for hanging the deer for skinning. The sun was casting long shadows as it sank into the early evening hours. The air was crisp but not too cold. It had been a very pleasant autumn day. I had started cooking dinner. Fresh deer liver fried with onions and blackberry brandy tonight, I told Tonette. It's a camp ritual when a deer is bagged. We heard the hunters coming up the trail, and being the smart alecky teenage girls that we were, decided to toy with them. So where's your meat? We're hungry, I yelled as they rode past me to the hitching post. They were not very amused, and one of them turned around and angrily yelled, well, where the hell is yours? That was all we needed. Tonette stood straight as an arrow and pointed to the meat hanging in the tree and said, right up there, are you hungry? We both dissolved into laughter.
Oh, that sounds like a fun time too. So if you are just tuning in again, that is the voice of author Roni McFadden, who was a longtime Mendocino County resident in the Redwood Valley, Willits area, who is now living in Idaho with her husband. And you have one child, I believe. And
we have 4 kids, but they're all out on their own. We're empty nesters here.
And you have won many awards for this book, The Longest Trail,
Mm-hmm.
and it is now a screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk, before we play more clips from the book, I'd like to tell the audience that Tracy, is it Beebe?
Beebe,
Beebe, who's an award-winning screenwriter whose stories focus on damaged characters and their relationships with each other, and her passion is writing horror with heart, character-driven genre fare with an underlying message. And her screenplay, Deep Water, was named one of the top 3 most recommended horror screenplays of 2019, as noted by The Blood List and The Hollywood Reporter. Her short film, Dog Years, in 2018, garnered her multiple festival awards, including Best Picture, Best Screenplay, and Best Female Filmmaker. So how do you end up meeting Tracy?
Oh my gosh. I was looking for a screenwriter and just putting feelers out everywhere. And I went on to LinkedIn and was, checking out screenwriters there, and came across this guy named Scotty. And I approached him with a query like, I'm looking for a screenwriter for this book, and this is what the book is about. And he said, I think I have the perfect person for you. He was friends with Tracy, and Tracy grew up in Napa. She lives in Texas now, but she grew up in Napa with horses. She has rescue horses now. And so Scotty put me in touch with her.
And she was a horse trainer too.
She's a horse trainer too. So She asked me to send her the book. I sent her the book. The next thing I know, she and her manager are on the phone with me making a deal. She, like you said, she focuses on horror, on the horror genre, but she said, this book is talking to me. And so she wrote a wonderful screenplay. She adapted it perfectly. It doesn't, like any screenplay, it doesn't exactly follow the book.
Right.
But the whole message of the book is still there in the screenplay.
I'll read the log line, and then I'd like to have you read some of the screenplay too. Okay. So the log line is, a traumatized teen steals a horse and runs away to live on a sacred mountain where she discovers a connection to native ancestors that just might save her life. So
yeah, it was hard trying to decide what was going to go in the screenplay. In the book, there's my husband's name is John. There's John Slaughter. There's the sheriff. She said we can't have all these characters in the screenplay, and you can only have one John. So which one is it going to be? So in the screenplay, my husband's name is Mac for McFadden, and we combined the characters of John Slaughter and the sheriff. We had to. That's just the way screenplays work. You have one hero, and so that's what we did. she did magic with the screenplay, adapting it.
Why don't we tell the audience too about John Slaughter? John Slaughter was such a big part of your life.
Yeah.
And I love the image of him on your Facebook page in your photos, if I could dig it up and find it again. But he was 96 years old, and
Right.
you had surprised him with the book.
Yeah, he was still in Altadena, and we moved away, and I had last seen him, I think, in 2007 at the PAC station. We had a couple of reunions at the PAC station with people who used to work there. So in 2007, his wife had passed away, and he took her ashes up to the PAC station, and several of us gathered. So that was the last time I had seen him. He was still driving his big old motorhome at that time. So then fast forward, he kept on asking when I was coming down, when I was coming down. I want to see the book. I want to see my book, he said. And so for his 96th birthday, we drove down. It's a 10-hour drive from Willits to Altadena. And we drove down, and I surprised him on his birthday, his 96th birthday, with that book. And, he's in a wheelchair, and he's holding the book, and he just, he almost cried. And it was just a really special moment to see him, spend a couple hours with him, leave him with the book. And he ended up passing away that November. There's the picture, yeah.
There he is.
Yeah. So that was the last time I saw him. He passed away in November.
Oh.
And one of the last things he asked me was, when I pass away, I want you to take me to the PAC station. And so I ended up being the receiver of his ashes, and they sat on my shelf for a long, long time. I was trying to figure out how to do it, when to do it.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to be involved. The PAC station is 6 hours away from Willits, so there was that. And finally, a dear friend who used to go to the PAC station with me, Arlene, in 2018, she called me up and she said, I'm going to the PAC station for my birthday. Do you want to go? And I said, yes. And so it was just her and me taking John to the PAC station. And I hiked up to the big rocks up behind where the cabin used to be. And I didn't hike up quite as fast as I ran up when I was 15, but took him up there, and I didn't know if I was going to bury him or if I was going to just, let him go. His wife's ashes were actually buried. I was standing on the rock, and I was talking to the spirits there. What should I do? And I opened the bag, and a gust of wind came up and just took him. And I went, okay, this is okay. This is all right. And then I looked down, and by my foot, there was no obsidian up there on those rocks. By my foot was an arrowhead.
Again.
Mm-hmm. So how can you not believe in something,
Right.
So
how can that not affect you?
Yeah. So that was my last talk with John.
When did you first meet him, John Slaughter?
I was 14.
Made such a big impact on your life.
I was 14, and his stable was just down the street from where I lived. And my friend Doug took me down there to meet him. And from that time on, I was with him all the time. He had a bunch of other kids that were hanging around too, but because I got kicked out of school and I was kind of an outcast, I had my little horse, but he had a lot of horses. And so I just was absorbed into his whole operation.
And how did you feel on that first PAC trip that he invited you on? I believe it was the last one of the year.
Yeah.
For that year.
Yeah. It was all I knew was I was nervous going, but once I was there, I knew I wanted to be there all the time. And so being the last one, he wasn't going to go back again until springtime. And that was a hard winter for me because I felt such a longing to be in that country. The desert and the mountains, and I just wanted to be there. And
then you spent the next several years doing that every summer.
Right. And
And
fall
one winter you
yeah,
stayed there.
we went up spring, summer, and fall, and then for 2 years I lived up there all winter
Describe
alone.
what that was like to live alone up there in the high country. And then there was a sheriff that checked on you too.
Right. The local sheriff came up. Inyo County is where the pack station is, and the local sheriff would come up and check on me. And incidentally, that was the time, it was 68, 69, when Charles Manson was kind of going around the area, and he had been up in Independence. So the sheriff kind of was on the lookout for different things, but he knew that I was living there alone. So he would come up every other day or so, just drive up the road and look for me.
In fact, I think was that time when you hurt your ankle, was that during the time that you were on your own?
Yes, yes. The first
Okay.
time that I met the sheriff was the time that we had a horse that broke his leg, and I had to put him down.
That was Maverick.
That was Maverick. And the sheriff, I was sitting in the middle of the road crying, and the sheriff drove up and, just took a look over the corral, saw what had happened. And, so that was the first time I'd met him.
Well, I said that we were going to talk about the screenplay, which we will get back to.
Okay.
But we are talking about The Longest Trail, a book by author Roni McFadden, formerly from Redwood Valley, Willits area in Mendocino County, now living in Idaho. And she writes about her life as a young girl in Southern California in the high Sierras there. And this clip is about that very, very difficult moment where she did have to take action with this horse. And it was not an easy time, but let's take a listen and we'll be right back.
As I walked around throwing hay in the feeders and got to the last one, I noticed Maverick standing in the same spot he was in when I came out. A feeling of dread came over me as fast as a cloud blots out the sun in a sudden storm. I called to him. He looked at me and perked his ears, but he didn't move. "Come on, boy," I called again. He didn't move. When I walked over to him, my eyes were drawn to the leg that he had cocked in a funny position. Oh, God, no, it can't be. Oh, please, oh, please, oh, please, no. I just stood there in front of him. He nudged me with his muzzle. I didn't want to believe my eyes, but it was so obvious that his leg was broken. He nickered at me. My heart dissolved into tears that came pouring out as I crumpled down in front of him, sobbing. What in the world was I going to do? How was I supposed to handle something like this? There had been no training in my years with John to prepare me for this kind of an emergency. I looked up into the bright early morning sky, still sobbing. "I'm alone here," I screamed to the heavens. "I'm only 17. What am I supposed to do?" Maverick nudged my shoulder. His eyes were full of pain, and yet he seemed worried about me. I cried harder. When my tears at last dried up, I looked around. The dogs were sitting next to me, and all the horses were looking at me. They weren't eating. It seemed that they were waiting to see what I was going to do. I said to myself, "Okay, Miss Roni, you were grown up enough to take this challenge on to be her alone. Now grow up and figure it out and make the right decision." Slowly, I stood up and walked around, talking to all the horses, my mind a jumble of racing, rambling thoughts. One by one, each horse seemed to go over to Maverick to give him support. I know it really isn't like that in the animal world, is it? Maverick just stood there as they nuzzled him and then returned to their food. My mind was clearing a bit and my chest hurt from crying so hard. I looked around, scanning down to the highway, hoping to see a trail of dust that would signal someone was coming to help. There was nothing there. Then I zeroed in on the rifle leaning against the post. A chill went through me as I realized what I had to do.
I can't even imagine what you must have gone through at that age, 17 years old. And yet you had a responsibility.
Yep.
You had to do something.
Yep.
And it's these kind of explorations into the soul of growing up, which is what this book is so much about. And it's about connecting with the environment around you.
Mm-hmm.
And where that led you, how that helped you grow up in life.
Mhm.
And John Slaughter was a huge part of that.
Yes.
And so you're talking about him and how you honored him in the end is just a beautiful thing, Ronnie.
Thank you.
And what I want to ask you about is, before we get back to the screenplay, the horses were amazing. And I think Hell's a Poppin' is a cool name, and which the kids got a kick out of, but you
Right.
called him Poppin' most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. The
And
kids.
I've got a few pictures up here, and I was just wondering, is this Poppin' that we see here in this picture here?
Yeah, that's Hell's a Poppin'.
Hell's a Poppin', an Appaloosa,
He's
and
a
you
leopard
seem
Appaloosa.
a leopard Appaloosa.
Uh-huh.
Beautiful. You seem drawn to a lot of Appaloosas. I know you have one, Romeo.
Yep, yep. Hell's a Poppin' was the best horse I'd ever had. He had a personality. He was a leader of the pack, so to speak. He just did everything. You could put a baby on him. He loved to jump. He did gymkhana, got ribbons in gymkhana. I showed him Western Pleasure, and he was just an awesome machine in the mountains.
And now I want to go, before we get to the screenplay again, there was another one that was Brownie, and then you had Sparrow. What are some of the other horses again?
I had Big Daddy. Big Daddy, he was also an Appaloosa. He was he was big. He was almost 17 hands high. He was the dumbest horse I've ever had. I hate to say that, but he ended up having night blindness, which is something that is common in some strains of Appaloosas.
I remember that now,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And then some of the other horses at the stables were Little Oats. That was the one that talked to the mountain lion on my pack trip. Screamed just like a mountain lion. We thought there was one in camp. Jinx, Blaze, the one that went tumbling down the hill. Sandpiper was our big Palomino pack horse that we usually use. There was a little stallion named Jade that I helped break. There's just a lot of horses went through my life.
So to the screenplay that has now been written by the award-winning writer Tracy Beatty, I just want to read one of the first paragraphs, then I'd like to have you read a paragraph, and then we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Okay, after getting into a fight at school and an even bigger fight with her mom, misfit Roni, 15, escapes to the horse pasture near her home, the only place she feels at peace. She watches a striking spotted Appaloosa named Poppin nervously trot around the other horses, and this is when she meets the man that will change her life, John Slaughter, half Paiute and all horsemen. Recognizing a bit of himself in Roni, he offers her a job helping out with the horses. Under John's fatherly attention and her time with the horses, Roni begins to blossom. It looks like her life is turning around until Roni is sexually assaulted by her mom's boss. Roni runs to Poppin for comfort, and before she knows it, they are galloping away from town and all the darkness it holds for her. That's a very grabbing first paragraph. It hits you kind of in the gut. And why don't you read now the second paragraph?
I'm trying to see where you are.
Okay, well, I can go ahead and read it if
you want to read it for me, because I'm kind of lost.
That's okay. Not even fully aware of what she's doing, Roni pushes the horse faster and faster, climbing the fire trail up the high Sierra Mountain. Exhausted, scared, and lost, Roni lets Poppin carry her through the woods until they find an abandoned hunting shack, complete with a stockpile of canned goods. She vows never leave the mountain, and the next day, she begins to have visions after finding a mysterious boulder covered with smooth pockmarks. Touching the massive stone, Roni feels she is transported to a simpler time and watches awestruck as a Paiute medicine woman demonstrates how to grind pine nuts against the stone. During her time in the mountain, Roni is visited by visions of this motherly native many times, and she begins to feel a sense of belonging that has been sorely missing from her life. During one such visitation, the medicine woman gives Roni a stone blade that Roni manages to carry with her out of the vision. It's not long before John, searching for his missing horse, tracks her down. Scared that he will force her to return home, Roni shares with him the reason why she ran away in the first place. Before knowing the healing powers of the sacred mountain, John agrees to square it with her mom so that she can stay a while longer. Before he leaves, he reminds her that she can't run forever and to light a fire on the high flat signal rock if she ever runs into trouble. For a few days, Roni lives in bliss, learning the ways of the ancestors from her visions and deepening her bond with Poppin as he carries her fearlessly in exploration of the mountain forest they now call home. So tell us where the screenplay takes us from there.
Gosh, well, we explore. I learn more from the native spirits. I form a bond with the horse, and I become more self-sufficient, as we go exploring. And in reality, I'm only there a few days during the screenplay. I am then accosted by one of the hunters that I grapple with in the beginning of the screenplay. And I run away, take Poppin, and we run. And I'm not going to spoil the rest of it because I don't want to spoil the ending.
That's good. Well,
But,
tell us what the plan is now for this screenplay and where you take it from here.
Well, we're shopping it around to several producers to see if it's going to get picked up. I did have one company in Canada that asked to read the play. So that's kind of where we are. We're just shopping it around, marketing, and waiting.
Where is Tracy? Is she in the
Tracy lives in Texas. Yeah,
Austin,
she lives
Texas.
Near there. And she's busy on other projects already,
Yeah.
But her heart is in this project, so she's helping us out as much as she can.
I just want to ask a little bit if you could be careful of touching your device, the digital device, because we're getting a little feedback.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if you're just tuning in, let me remind our listeners, or let our listeners know, that this is author Roni McFadden, multi-award winning author Roni McFadden, former Mendocino County resident who grew up in the Southern California area of Altadena, and she is now living in Idaho. She brought out a book 9 years ago called The Longest Trail through Biscuit Press, from Ridgewood Ranch, where she used to live, the home of Seabiscuit. And this book has won several awards over the years. It became an audiobook, which you've heard a few clips so far that were read by Roni. And I'm Leanne Lindsay. This is Peggy's Place on KGUA in Northern California, Wallala, coastal town right at the junction of Mendocino County and Sonoma County. And we are streaming around the world at kgua.org, and we are at 88.3 FM along the coast. And we are also live on YouTube today, and you'll be able to catch this whole show on our KGUA channel on YouTube. And later today, this show will repeat at 1 o'clock, and it'll be available on SoundCloud after that. And Roni, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. I've had to put you off a few times coming on the show, but you're finally here, and we're finally talking about this great book and this great new screenplay. I really do wish you guys all the success with it.
Thank you.
And what are some of the next steps that you will be taking with it? I mean, how do you reach out to those producers?
Well, we're just going every avenue we can think of. We're doing internet searches, and I had a script on Inktip for a time, which is a place where you can put your scripts and producers check in on there. And so there were some leads from there that I've sent queries to. We do a lot of internet searches. My daughter is my publicist now. And my daughter-in-law is also helping me with the searches. So it's just kind of intensive trying to find the right fit and then sending the queries off. And the hardest part is waiting.
Yes, it is. I know. I've been in this realm for a few years now since I began a documentary, as you know, back in 2015.
Right.
But I haven't been able to work on it full time all the time, just here and there. Have a lot of footage, a lot of interviews, and have the packaged presentation like you have a pitch deck. And now my part where I'm at is doing a new trailer, repackaging the presentation and getting it off to another woman filmmaker. And this one's in Los Angeles. And her name is Ashley Avis. She came out with a new Black Beauty movie. But she might be able to assist me down the road with that. But it takes a lot of effort and time and energy to put together something like this and then get it out in the world. But I am really looking forward to the day that we could see this again on a big screen. Boy, would it be great to go to a movie theater again, or just be at home and see it on Netflix or Hulu or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's just a dream, and that's what we have to continue to do, is follow those dreams and see where they take us.
That's right. That's right.
And part of that is it reflects on the journey that you went through with the longest trail and the growth that you made. And also this mysticism that you had about the Native American culture. And in these last few minutes, talk about how that influences this screenplay that is just now being shopped around.
Well, the mysticism has stayed with me my whole life. I mean, ask my kids. I've got Native American stuff all over my house. And, they say, but you're not even Native American. I go, but my heart is, and so it's kind of driving me to get it made and to have, so that Native Americans have a voice. I'm kind of looking at Native American film producers to see if any of them might be interested in picking it up.
I have an idea, a gentleman who's on the board of this station. In fact, KGUA is a project of the Native Media Resource Center and is run by a Native American woman, Peggy Berryhill, who I am hosting for today. So I have a connection for you.
Okay, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Rick Tejada Flores. So I'll connect with you about that later, but I can understand why you would take it in that direction.
Yeah.
But you are heavily influenced by Native American culture.
Heavily. And to this day, the Appaloosa horse, I think that's why I'm so drawn to Appaloosa horses, because they were the Nez Perce tribe's breed. And that's the only kind of horse I wanted to have once I had Hellzapoppin. And then I didn't have a horse for 20 years, and Romeo came into my life, and he's a leopard Appaloosa. He's foundation stock, descending right from the Nez Perce tribe. And he's the love of my life now. He's prettier than Hellzapoppin was. He's not quite as smart, but I'm very, very drawn to that native aspect of him. Native mysticism has just always been a large part of my life, my spirit, my mind, my heart, my soul.
You spent so many of nights out, laying out under the stars, very remote, high up in the high country, either with other pack trips, those that had come on the pack trips, other hunters and things like that, or you were on your own, connecting with the land, connecting with the animals,
right,
and everything that was there. Yeah. So I can see how it would heavily influence you.
Yeah, it did.
And one thing I want to play right now, as a matter of fact, in these last few minutes, is this clip. It's a dream segment with the old medicine woman. All right, we'll be right back.
I sit down by the fire and watch the women going about their chores, and suddenly realize that the sheriff had said these people probably didn't have fire. The old woman comes and sits next to me with herbs and sage to wrap the fish in. I did not think you had fire. It is commonly thought that you did not, I say to her as we work to prepare the fish. It's true that it is not common that we build a fire, and we don't usually have one this close to where we sleep. But we do have fire, as you can see. Why do they think we don't have fire? She asked. I can't remember the exact explanation, but it has something to do with never finding any burnt areas like cooking pits, I replied. Look at the fire and tell me why they will never find what they seek, the old woman instructed. I looked for several minutes trying to figure out the old woman's puzzle. Oh, your fire does not touch the ground. It's built up over the ground. Why? Would you burn your provider? We protect her. She gives us rocks to build up a place to put fire, the woman says reverently. I stare at the rocks and say, but have they never found any of these burnt rocks either? They are looking for things like this, and they won't find them until the earth decides to share them. She does not divulge all of her secrets at once. We place these rocks where she tells us. They are not usually close to our sleeping areas. In due time, your seekers may find what they are searching for, or maybe it shall be hidden forever, the old woman says as she places the fish under the rock formation holding the fire.
So tell us where that came from.
Where did that come from? Well, I'd been reading some books that the sheriff had brought up, talking about some of the habits and things that they had found from the ancient Paiutes in the area. And that was one of the comments that was made, that they built their fires up on raised rocks. And so that dream segment, included that conversation with the woman.
And you can find Roni's book on Amazon and at other resellers as it's called The Longest Trail, now a screenplay that they are shopping around. And one last thing that I wanted to read from the screenplay adaptation of it is that Roni finally understands that trouble can find her no matter how far she runs, and what matters is how she handles herself when it does.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is going to be a very important element of this whole movie that you are working on getting it produced.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. And so how could people get a hold of you if they would like to just send you information or just connect with you? Is there an email or website that you'd like to share?
Yes, the website is www.thebiscuitpress.com, and my contact information is on there. You can also go to thelongesttrail.com, and that will take you to the website, or the Facebook page, The Longest Trail by Roni McFadden. Could contact me through all of those.
And you've won several awards for this book already. Congratulations on that.
Thank
One of them
you.
was Dan Pointer's. That was a good one. You won
Yeah.
gold.
And the Will Rogers Medallion Award, that was a big one.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
And speaking of Native American culture, our next show is Native America Calling.
Oh, wow.
And we're just about to go to that in just a moment, but I just want to thank you so much, Roni, for joining us today on Peggy's Place.
Thank you, Leanne, for having me, and it's really good to talk to you and see you again.
It's really good to see you too, and I've even got Roni as an interview in one of my clips that I'm going to put into the trailer for my documentary that I'm working on. And I'll come up and visit you in Idaho one of these days.
I would love that.
All right. Thanks so much, Roni. Great to
Okay.
see you, and congratulations. Best wishes.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Have a great day.
You too. And goodbye to all of our YouTube watchers out there. We're going to now transition out of Peggy's Place here at KGUA in Wallala 88.3 FM. I'm Leanne Lindsay. You have been listening to Peggy's Place.